Hi everyone, we're going to talk about inflation, probably the single biggest topic in the world of macro. On the one hand, you have those people who think inflation is largely cyclical. So as the economic cycle got really hot in 2021 and 2022, loads of demand, stimulus checks, zero interest rates, that boosted inflation. And now that the Fed is hiking interest rates, the cycle is cooling down, demand levels are falling, and inflation will go back to 2%, right? Then, on the other hand, you have people who believe that part of the rise in inflation is structural. And by structural, they're referring really not to the demand side of the economy, but to the supply side of the economy. And this refers to longer term shifts that have been occurring, for example, in the US economy, that are shrinking the amount of available labor supply and generally moving costs higher. What are those factors? Well, those factors include a demographic shift that is seeing 100,000 baby boomers retire every week, so the available labor supply is shrinking. Offshoring to cheap labor abroad has moved to onshoring more expensive labor at home. Immigration controls are tighter, and the levels of immigration, for example, into the US are lower than they used to be. Geopolitical concerns mean that the world is shifting away from free trade and towards fair trade, secure trade, and managed trade. And there are actually a bunch of other factors that are negative for the supply side of the economy. The one factor that's positive for the supply side of the economy is technology, and let's hope that technology and technological progress continues to improve productivity, and that helps the supply side of the economy. So what is the reality here? How much of the 5% roughly core inflation that we have in the US is cyclical and how much is structural? Well, a recent study by the San Francisco Fed actually broke down inflation into its cyclical and structural pieces, and it found that 40% of the current inflation is actually structural, and you can see that in the chart that's coming up on the screen. Now, this makes life much harder for the Fed because it means they're going to have to squeeze the demand side that bit more in order to overcompensate for the fact that there's a certain part of the inflation they're trying to fight that they can't really deal with in the short term. And lastly, why is it so important for the Fed to hit their inflation target? Well, given the amount of government debt there is in major economies, the cost of servicing that debt has become really important. And it's really important for governments that the cost of servicing the very large amounts of debts they now have are manageable. If the central banks lose their credibility that they really are serious about fighting inflation, then global bond investors will require much higher returns from government debt, and that would be very, very painful for developed economies. They just can't afford long-term government bond yields to rise, which means they just can't afford to lose their inflation-fighting credibility that it's taken about 30 to 40 years to gain, and it means the Fed and other central banks absolutely have to keep markets convinced that they are serious about getting inflation back down to 2%. Good luck out there. Thank you.